Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 149 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Matt Heer of Saddleback Church, and we talk all about what Generation Z kind of looks like in their middle school ministry and how are they teaching and what is changing. Is there anything with their approach that they do differently in light of just the different culture that Gen Z has grown up in? So that's a fun conversation. You're going to love that. Before we jump into that, I want to let you know that we have 3 free webinars coming up with Ministry Boost. And with Ministry Boost, we offer courses and coaching and all of that. But of course, those courses are paid courses. Coaching with YouLead does cost money. It's a big investment. It's a great investment, but it's a big investment. But we also like to do these webinars because they're free and you could, participate, learn from them. We got 3 of them coming up in back-to-back weeks. The first one is quite unique. We're calling it Leading Ministry with the 4 Disciplines of Execution model. There's a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. For many of you, you feel like that sounds like a terrible book. I would not want to read that. If you like strategy, if you like leadership, if you lean towards a business mindset, and when it comes to leading in church and acknowledging, of course, that it's all God-inspired businesses sometimes just figure some things out. That book is really just a process for how any organization can get things done. How do you take your plan, your strategy, what you want to accomplish in the next year, quarter, whatever it might be, and do it? And so we talk about how it could be used in ministry with the team from LCBC Church, and they've been doing it for a few years now. And so if you're interested in that, that's June 13th, Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. All of them are Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern in back-to-back weeks. So that's the first one, June 13th. The next week, we're going to talk about innovative solutions to your greatest staffing problems. So if you lead staff, you're going to love this conversation because we're going to talk about structure and how you structure your staff could actually help you get more out of staff. And so it may not be, all of us would love to have more staff, but maybe that's not, on the table, but you can feel like you get more staff if you structure it the right way. So we'll talk about that June 20th. And then the last one I imagine everybody wants to take part in because we're going to talk about empowering volunteers to lead like staff. The idea of implementing volunteer coaches in your ministry. How do you recruit them, implement them, empower them to lead like staff? That's going to be Thursday, June 27th. 2 p.m. Eastern. So you can sign up for all of those at ministryboost.org/webinars. But let's go ahead now and jump into a conversation with Matt Heer about middle school ministry at Saddleback Church and Generation Z, and what are they learning? Well, today I'm talking with Matt Heer on the podcast. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You bet. So tell us about you, your family, and your church.
Yeah, for sure. So I work at Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California. I'm on the junior high team. Been here for 5 years now, but originally not from Southern California at all, from Indiana, good old Midwest. That's where I was born and raised. Went to school out there, Indiana Wesleyan University, studied youth ministry. When I was like 13 is when God told me that he wanted me to be a youth pastor. So that was the trajectory moment for me in my life and the calling that I received, and then went to school to study youth ministry. After school, I did a residency program at 12 Stone Church in outside Atlanta, Georgia, and that was really where I cut my teeth a little bit and got to experience and do ministry. And then got hired at Saddleback in 2014. Sorry. So I've been out here the past 5 years. Single, not married yet. My family is all kind of all over the place now. Got a sister in San Diego, married, and then my brother's in Chicago, parents back in Indiana. So we're a little spread out. But
all right. But two of you are in California. So,
yes.
There's that. Enjoying that nice weather.
Yeah. She's married to a Marine Corps officer. So who knows where they'll be a year from now. But
true.
For now, we're in the same place. So it's cool.
And you, like you said, you spent time at 12 Stone with the residency there and learned from my friend Kevin Monahan everything not to do. You know what I mean? Just don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. Kevin's awesome, obviously.
No, That's Kevin helped me get my job. So I took him to a nice steak dinner because he made the connection to Katie Edwards. So I owe a lot to that man for sure.
Kevin is awesome. That's cool. Well, he says amazing things about you. So I'm excited to have you on the podcast and talk about what's going on at Saddleback with junior high ministry. But kind of the theme, and you're the one that brought this up because it's something you're really digging into there, is reaching and teaching Gen Z, which is a great thing to talk about. We haven't really talked about it much on this podcast. So before we do that, though, specifically, what is like your role involved on the junior high team at Saddleback? For sure.
So I'm the associate junior high pastor under Katie Edwards. And so she and I kind of partner together to lead and the big picture vision, direction for the ministry. Specifically my role, the biggest area that I lead is our weekends. So we have our large group and small groups separated. So we do our large group stuff on the weekends. We have services on Saturday and Sunday. And that's where we do our large group stuff. So our teaching, our worship, that kind of stuff, our church service. So I lead that. I lead the planning, programming, scope, creative stuff. So that's my main gig. And then, I kind of got my hands in a little bit of everything as well. So it's super fun.
That's awesome. And you kind of explained some of it there, but we had Katie Edwards on the podcast. It's been a while. We talked, I think, mostly about kind of like the scope and cycle. What do you teach in middle school? How's that different from high school? All that. But you said you do small group and large groups separately. I love to get an idea whenever we talk student ministry of kind of like, what's your model? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, because everyone does it a little bit different, right?
They do. So you're doing is the large group during services at Saddleback on the weekends, and then small group is in homes during the week? Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, exactly. So we have 4 services on the weekends that mirror our adult service, and that's kind of church wide. So our kids and our students and our adults all are having services at the same time, and so those are at the same times. And then our small groups are midweek, and the way our model that we've been doing here for a long time is meeting in homes. So we have grade and gender specific groups that meet in homes kind of all over our community. So that's the same for junior high and for high school.
Cool. Now my information about this may be either completely wrong or just outdated, but I seem to remember thinking the Saddleback, one thing that was interesting about Saddleback, and this even goes years back, is that, and sometimes the group attendance would be larger than weekend attendance. Is that true for junior high or no? Is it the other way around?
That is still very true. Yeah. So right now we have around 650 kids signed up for a small group for junior high. And then on our weekends, we're seeing between 400 or 500 or so attending our weekends. So there's definitely some crossover, but the interesting thing, and I'll kind of touch on this a little bit later on, that we're seeing is that a lot of our kids are either coming to one or the other. They still consider us their home, our ministry their home, but and our model is different than a lot of churches. A lot of churches do have their small groups and large groups happening at the same time or on the same day. But since we're separated, we're seeing that more and more our kids are giving us one or the other. So that definitely is something that we are seeing a lot of and seeing, trying to figure out the implications of that, and moving forward, what does that look like for us? So I don't want to get too deep into that because we'll touch on that a little bit, I think, but yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. I just know that's unique. I know a lot. I mean, some churches have that as well. It's not like you're the only one, but I don't think that's common. I think most of the time, the large group is larger, certainly if it's during a service. So, well, let's talk about Gen Z and what it is informing and teaching all that. So what are you learning about Gen Z as you've done research and tried to figure out, okay, what does this mean for the students who are Generation Z and we're trying to reach them?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a little bit of a can of worms for sure. And we're kind of neck deep in this research season right now, I guess you can call it, where we're just trying our best to understand Gen Z. And I know that we're definitely not the first people or pioneers in this. There's plenty of people who are doing tons of great research out there. And basically we're just trying to compile what we're learning from all these different areas. And so, it's a lot right now that we're trying to sift through and sort through. It's interesting because when you look out there's a lot of Gen Z research, but at the same time, not a lot. Some of the stuff is dated. Google did a big research report, but it came out in 2016. So that's already 3 years old now. So there's a lot of research out there, but at the same time, not a ton. And I think what we're seeing is Gen Z has either gotten grouped in or lost in the shadow of millennials. And all this research and stuff on millennials, I've been researching a lot of like marketing, reports and research on Gen Z. And I think initially they were being grouped in with millennials as far as how they're targeted and what they want and what they're looking for. But they're super distinct in a lot of different ways. So all that to say, I think, there's a lot, that's, like I said, it's kind of a can of worms, but some of the biggest things that we've come to find out about Gen Z is, one, that they're not digital, pioneers like millennials are. They're digital natives. So they don't know anything but technology and being connected and those kind of things. They're not tech savvy, but they're tech dependent. That's like what some research is saying. And another thing is this was interesting for me, is that they're the most diverse generation that we're seeing right now. And there's research that says that this will be the last generation with a white majority. It's at like 52% right now, white majority, and then kind of a little bit of everything else after that. But most Gen Zers feel overwhelmingly positive about diversity, and they don't see diversity until it's absent, which is really interesting. I'm just kind of like,
that is interesting, because that's probably so. I feel like now that they finally put a bow on millennials and what totally. The ages are, I got bumped out. I just missed it. So like, I was born in 1980.
Sorry, man.
I don't know if it really matters to me though. There is some things that are funny. It's like the lost generation. It's like 80 to 84, whatever. And and sometimes that's how it works with some of these studies, that it really takes a while until they even define what is the age group and all that. But certainly my generation, certainly before my generation, diversity wasn't noticed when it wasn't there. It was noticed when it was there. So you're saying now, Gen Z, it's the opposite. It's like they see it when it's absent. Like I remember I went to a high school graduation for some of our students, and they live, in a county north of us. And it was very obvious to me then, this was probably 6 years ago, that I thought, wow, that just based on watching kids walk across the stage and everything, it was like, I thought, I don't know, that was this 5% not white, 8? I mean, it was not very high, which is not, our church is in a context that's much more diverse than that, but it stood out to me then. But I think you're right. It makes sense. It's probably the other way. That's how it is now. It's like you notice it when it's not diverse. That makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. So I've got a small group. I lead a small group of 7th grade boys, and there's 11 of them. And of the 11, I have 6 different nationalities represented. And just that, and that's like a small sample, and that's
awesome.
That's not like representative of our whole ministry by any means. But in a lot of ways, it kind of is. And I think that's where we're kind of heading as a country, not just, and it's becoming less and less, segregated as far as, a rural context versus like a suburban context versus an urban context will look more and less diversified. I think it's becoming a little bit more across the board, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
definitely. What else?
Yeah. The as far as spirituality of next gen, this is really interesting stuff that we're finding out. And Ashley Bohens from Orange wrote a blog post this past year about some of like what your church needs to know about Gen Z. And this is some interesting stuff that she gathered. But this is the first what they're calling post-Christian generation, where this generation will have overwhelmingly less spiritual experience than any other. And so in a lot of ways, I think we look at that, and it feels like we're going backwards. This is one of the things that Ashley pointed out, which I thought was brilliant. But I think in a lot of ways, it's less of a going backwards as much as like a blank slate. And where with their parents, Gen Z's parents, they had a lot of them had negative experiences of church. I think a lot of these Gen Z, this Gen Z's and whatever generation, I don't even know what to call it sometimes, but they have no religious experience rather than like negative. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
So in a lot of ways, it's like it's creating an awesome opportunity for us as a church, right?
Yeah, because you don't have to maybe heal old wounds as much as introduce from scratch or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not starting, below ground zero. You're starting a little bit at ground zero. So I think that's hopeful for me, at least. I mean, I think, a lot of these, we look at this generation as a little bit of a blank slate, which is kind of cool. Another really, this is something across the board that all the research is pointing to, is that this is the loneliest generation, is what all the research is kind of pointing to. That even like the idea of connections over social media is more of an illusion than reality, and is creating this illusion that this generation is uber connected and has all these, this vast scope of relationships. But the reality is that those aren't authentic, and they're not filling the need for relationships that humans have, right? It doesn't, and that doesn't matter generation to generation. I think every human has a need for authentic relationships, and they're not finding them over things like social media. And so that's leading to this generation being categorized as the loneliest generation, which, points to the depression rates in teenagers, mm-hmm. and the stress rates that are skyrocketing in this generation. And so we're seeing more and more kids being overstressed and depressed than we ever have before. And I think a lot of it comes from this loneliness that a lot of them feel. So, I think, as we'll talk about implications of this and what we're kind of learning and what we're, trying to build from. But this is one of the biggest truths about this generation, I think, that we need to understand and, really take into account, is that these kids are lonely and that they're craving relationships that are real. Mm-hmm. Along with that, I think this generation has these huge cravings and desires for belonging and significance. So they want to be a part of something, and they want to be a part of something that matters. They're very social conscious. So they care about the environment. They care about social justice, a ton. Those are some of their biggest desires. So they want to belong to something, but they want to belong to something that matters. And so I think that creates a cool opportunity for us as a church too, right? Where we can offer a place for them to belong, where they can experience real relationships, and we have something that matters a ton, right? It matters the most. And so if we find a way to, and it sounds really dirty and weird, I think, saying market Christianity, but if we can find a way to market what we have to offer in a way that that's gonna appeal to them, in the way that they're gonna understand. It's not a matter of twisting it. It's not a matter of bait and switch at all. I think it's a matter of understanding what they're looking for and framing what we have to offer that meets that need.
Yep. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Are there other things that you're learning that you want to share, or do you want to shift gears and talk about like what you're doing in light of it? Yeah.
I think let's shift to, the implications of what we're learning. So I think, and I've mentioned a few of these, but as far as the spiritual climate of Gen Z, I think the fact that we're starting at ground zero a little bit with this generation, does create a really huge opportunity. Now, what that means for us is we have to figure out how to leverage these things that we know, these truths that we know, in a way that's going to meet them where they're at. The ways that we've done church, might need to change, might need to adapt to this new generation. And that's not to say that we need to, completely rewrite the script by any means, but I think, it'd be probably a little naive for us to assume that the ways that the strategies and approaches that we've used to reach generations in the past, and, even the ways that we were reached when we were teenagers, will be the same for this generation, because I just think that that's not the case, and you and I, even, we were born 10 years apart, but we were reached in very different ways than these kids are being reached. And so, and that the ways that they need to be reached. So that's the implication. I think when it comes to, their online self, the research is, there's statistics all over the place, but at least 80% of teenagers between 12 and 18 have smartphones, and they're getting them younger and younger. Yep. We just had an event this past Wednesday night. So we just do 7th and 8th grade here at our campus for junior high. 6th grade is part of the elementary program. And so we're about to onboard this new 6th, almost to become 7th grade class in just a couple weeks, like the top of June. And so we do these transition events. And so we did an event on Wednesday night for 6th graders. And we had a group of them, and we did this like informal survey where we just like typed out these little pieces of paper with some questions on them. And one of the questions was, do you have a smartphone? What are your favorite apps and websites? Who are your favorite YouTubers? Just trying to kind of get a gauge of, and what activities are you involved in? Just like 6 different questions. They're all like 11 or 12 years old, right? So they're mostly 12 years old in 6th grade. And only 6 of the 50 that we surveyed didn't have a smartphone yet. Mm-hmm. And that's different than even a couple years ago. I think a couple years ago, what we were seeing was that when we got our new 7th grade class, most of them didn't, a lot of them didn't have phones until like they would get them on like Christmas or their birthday that year. Like like 13 or so was like normally the age that they would get a phone, but now it's like 12, and it's like a rite of passage in a lot of ways. I saw research that was like, it's on par with, I think this was in Google, is like on par with graduating from high school and getting your driver's license is getting a smartphone.
I can see that for them.
Yeah,
I can see that.
Totally. Yeah. And so that's really interesting. And not that I think a lot of times we'll jump into, we just need to like be on social media and doing those things. For sure. Like social media is a great way to reach them, but also one of the things I'm thinking through right now is how can we teach kids when we teach them, and talking about applications of how can you be Jesus? How can you, be a Christian, to your friends at school, to your sports teams, to your club, to your neighbors. We need to be teaching them how to be Christians online, because they're spending so much of like 3 hours plus a day online on social media or YouTube or whatever. So we need to be teaching them what does it look like to be a Christian in your online life, because that's a real part of their world, right?
Yeah, so, definitely. I've seen what is it? Something like, and I don't know if it was middle schoolers, Gen Z. I'm not sure what the segment is, but it was teenagers basically. And the number one job like they want to have when they grow up is be a YouTuber. You know what I mean? And something like 95% consume YouTube content daily. Something, it's just really, really high.
Totally. And that's another trend of Gen Z, and a characteristic is that they're entrepreneurs. So they've grown up with seeing how you can make money and how you can have influence just by like using the things that you have or the things that you're good at. And so video games, they see like YouTubers that are making millions of dollars literally off filming themselves playing video games, which is something that I don't understand. And like, I think a lot of times that we'll see that and we just like laugh it off as something that's silly, but that's super real, and they're making real money doing it. And it's something that our kids are seeing, these teenagers are seeing, and that, they see how easy sometimes it is to leverage what you have or what you're good at and do something with it. Yeah. So that's really, really interesting for sure.
How are you using, like maybe we could even talk YouTube for a little bit, because you were saying that you're exploring that more. I feel like you're even doing it in your kids ministry there, but like, what are you doing with YouTube to try to reach and teach Generation Z?
Totally. Yeah. Our kids ministry has an awesome YouTube, and they use their YouTube. The vast majority of their videos that they're making are content for their teaching or their small groups. And so they make these really stellar animations that are teaching through Bible stories, and they have like millions of hits. It's crazy. We in junior high, our YouTube has primarily been used to post our weekend messages, to like post highlight videos from summer camp, baptism videos, something like that. And so where we're at right now is we're talking a long time. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while, but why wouldn't we take something like YouTube, which is by like far and away the most visited and used app and website for middle schoolers? Like there's not even anything that's close to that. It's YouTube. So why wouldn't we take something like YouTube where they're hearing and soaking in all these different voices from all over the place? And why wouldn't we want to be a voice that they're hearing? That's like the biggest question that we're asking ourselves is, how can we be a voice that is engaging, but also positive, and pointing them to ways that they can belong and find their identity and experience significance. So that's basically what we're going to try to do. We're kind of relaunching our YouTube and putting a lot of energy and time and effort into creating content and creating videos, not just to be funny, not just to be engaging, but to point them and connect them back to a community that they can belong to and to Jesus. And so basically we're approaching YouTube right now as a new and reimagined evangelistic arm of our ministry, and it's very much not, we're going to be very careful to not make it a bait and switch thing, because kids smell fake and they can smell that kind of stuff a mile away. They want authentic, and all the marketing research that I have looked at for Gen Z is, the most effective marketing strategy is influencer marketing. So that's why you see like basketball players that are posting stuff about random products. Shoes. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Hulu has live sports right now. Like all this, all this stuff, it's influencer marketing. It's people that, and Gen Z feels like they can connect to these people on a real level, even if they, it's behind a screen. They feel like they can relate to these people. And so we're approaching that from kind of the same standpoint of, we don't want to be YouTube famous, but we want to be influencers for our kids, right? We think that we should be people who are authentic and engaging and having a voice that they can feel like they connect with. But the messages that we're giving them are different than what they're hearing from these other voices. And hopefully that will connect them back to the church and community and connect them to a place that they can belong with and find a source of significance from. So
there's a friend of mine that
kind of general overview of kind of what we're thinking, but
a friend of mine, they've recently started doing, like, when you watch a YouTube video, there's an ad that plays before the video starts. The pre-roll ad. They were doing short little 10-second pre-roll ads, and they would target 3 miles around each middle school that's, part of their ministry. And I guess you can do that. And then they would and all it was the junior high pastor at whatever that, campus was that would reach that middle school. 10 seconds just inviting them to their middle school thing. Which
no way.
That is pretty cool. Wow. That's a really great idea.
It's meeting them exactly where they're at. And
because they're watching it. I mean, that's like, if you want to target that age group, you've picked the right platform. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So that's cool. Now, we were talking a little bit before we recorded about teaching, and you're still teaching in somewhat the same fashion, but it sounds like you're thinking about, is it still working? Does something need to change? Like, what are you wrestling with there?
Yeah, wrestling is a good word for it, for sure. I think, and we've been wrestling over this for a little while, but here's where we're at basically is, I think the traditional sermon, message, teaching time, whatever you want to call it, in our large group, I think the way that we've done that in the past and the way that we have been doing it is probably needs to change in order to reach and teach the Gen Z generation and what's coming after them more effectively. I think a lot of that, attention span is a big piece of that, which I think every person that's listening can relate to when it comes to Gen Z. But the research is saying now millennial attention span was 12 seconds and now Gen Z is 8. So it's quick, and not to say
like, cause as if 12 was really good anyway.
Right? Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So not to say that I think we need to, be appealing to their attention spans all the time. I think they can handle, I mean, they can listen to stuff more than 8 seconds, of course. They can listen to a 20-minute message, but you better be sure that it's something that's engaging and something that is appealing to them. And again, I think I think that sounds like backwards sometimes, and it sounds like we are, manipulating God's word, and I know God's word doesn't return void. I know those truths to be true, and it's not a matter of manipulating or twisting or watering anything down by any means. It's a matter of understanding what is appealing to them and meeting them with the gospel, meeting them with truth. And so, practically speaking, what that looks like for us is, again, I think the traditional standing on a stage or standing in front of a room of kids and just talking for 20 minutes, I think that's not probably going to be the most effective, or is already the most effective way to teach Gen Z. I think what they need is practical and experiential learning, right? So they need stuff that's going to be really practical in their world, and they need something that is experiential. And those are the things that will be the most sticky. So when I'm talking about teaching, again, our large group and small group is separated. So we're thinking teaching on our large group, church time, and then as well as our small groups, like sitting in a circle in a room of a small group of teenagers and going through a lesson time with them. So both are teaching times, and both need to kind of adapt, I think, a little bit. And so we're trying on our weekends, so on our large group stuff, just switching things up. So we've done a whole bunch of different message formats or teaching kind of formats. A lot of those have to do with video. So we're trying to teach via video. We found that if you put somebody on stage or in front of a room talking for 5 minutes, kids will start to get distracted, talk to their neighbor, all that stuff. When you throw a 5-minute video in front of them, or even a 3-minute video in front of them, almost all the kids are clicked in the whole time. It's really kind of frustrating and annoying, but fascinating at the same time, that how they're able to connect over video. They're just used to it. They watch 25-minute YouTube videos of this guy playing video games, or a makeup tutorial, and so they can handle engaging in something for a long time, but it has to be authentic. It has to be, it has to feel genuine for them. So we're trying to change it up. Another thing that we're trying to do is teaching through stories. We did another survey with our life group kids, so the kids that are in our small groups, a couple months ago, and we asked them, this survey was about YouTube specifically, but also teaching on the weekends. So basically the question was like, what would you want to see them more of, as far as like via video or via, on the weekends? And the number one answer, which was a surprise for us, was people's stories. So they wanted to hear stories either from their peers or from other people. So some of the leaders in our ministry, our staff, other people outside of our church, they want to hear people's stories. And I think that connects to this idea of authenticity and how they connect with things that are authentic and real. And so when it comes to a story, they'll listen to, we've been trying to do that a lot. So probably at least once or twice a month, we have one of our junior high kids share their story. Either they're about to get baptized, and so they're sharing a little bit of their story over video before they get baptized, or live in front of the room. We have a kid share their testimony, and it's amazing how quiet the room is during those times, because kids are connecting to it. They connect stories, which is really fascinating. So question for us that we're thinking through is, how can we teach more through stories? So how can we communicate truth and communicate, like pieces of God's word and scripture and truth about who Jesus is and what he's like, but how can we do that and help to connect those dots via stories? So that's a really cool thing. I think that will be one of the things going forward that will influence how we teach a lot, for sure.
Yeah. When we were talking about before, it like crossed my mind. I thought, I don't even know if this would be effective, but if students, middle school or high school, are so connected to YouTube or so connected to phones and devices and all that, and will watch media that way, what if teaching was like, watch these 3-minute videos during the week and you send them out, and then there's maybe another 3-5-minute one on Sunday. It's almost like the pieces of the message are now delivered in chunks or something, and then you talk. I don't even know, but then the problem is, of course, you've got a huge percentage not watching all of them or any of the, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like you can't control it all, so you'd have to figure out, okay, well, what needs to be said in the one when they're here in case they don't get the other ones. But like I could see something like that.
Totally. And you brought up another great problem. I think that we've got to figure it out. And I think this is going to become, if not already across the board for church, is because kids and families are so over involved and over committed, they're just not going to be willing to give us more than one day a week. And I think that has massive implications for how we do church. So in our context, I mean, because we're separated, because our large group and our small group are separated, a question that we're asking ourselves, which I hope my Kurt Johnson, my boss, isn't listening to this right now, but the question that we're
every episode.
I know he does, right?
Probably not, but he's been on once. He's been on one time.
Yeah. So, because this messes with our whole purpose-driven strategy, but how are we okay, or how can we be okay with a kid only coming to either our large group stuff on the weekends or small group, not both? Because I think in our traditional strategy, we, and in the perfect world, a kid who's not connected to church comes to a weekend service, loves it, gets connected, keeps coming, eventually will join a small group. Then that's their next step, is to join a small group. Because that's like, our funnel approach. That's like the next step down the funnel, is to join a small group. But now it's the game's kind of changing, where kids are signing up for small groups who aren't Christians yet, have never been to a weekend service, and so the question that we're going after right now and trying to dig into is, are we okay with that? Are we okay with kid only coming to one or the other? And then if so, how can we adapt maybe those experiences to incorporate more of a holistic, what we want our kids to experience? Because obviously in a small group setting, they're not experiencing things like corporate worship. They're not experiencing, the churchy stuff. How can we adapt a little bit and to incorporate some more of that? So I think that's coming, if not here already, where more and more families are just not going to give us more than one day a week. And so, that's pretty big. And that definitely has implications on how we can do church. But I think that's why something like YouTube and social media and reaching through those avenues is going to be that much more crucial, right, for our relevancy in this generation.
Yeah, I agree. Any last thoughts, about all this? What you learn, what you're implementing, what's, any of that?
Here's one of the biggest things in light of all this is that I think our church and our senior leadership might need, and this is like kind of across the board for, I think, all of us, is they might need some help understanding this. And they might need some help understanding how to reach this generation, because the reality is they're already making up a quarter of our population. That's what the research is saying, is Gen Z is making up a fourth of the US population. And so because of that, how are we sharing and helping our senior leadership understand that reaching young people is no longer just the job of the youth ministry, but it's the job of the whole church. And so I think we're going to have to lead as a youth ministry. we're going to have to lead up in this a lot more probably to help our church understand that, hey, we have to understand these things, and we have to understand the implications. We have to understand how to reach and teach young people better, and know that it's no longer just the youth ministry's responsibility, but it's our whole church's responsibility. So I would encourage any youth worker out there there's some good research out there. I mean, our hope is that we're going to be compiling some of this stuff and then sharing it somehow soon. But there's some good stuff out there. Orange is doing some great research and already has some good content out there if you're familiar with Orange. So there's a lot of stuff out there. I would say do some research and learn about your audience and your future audience. Gen Alpha is coming. That's what they're calling the next one. And that's going to be even different, than this one. So do some research and then figure out how you can lead up to the rest of your church to understand that this isn't just the responsibility of the youth ministry, but it's actually the responsibility of our whole church to be reaching this generation. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And maybe even, if you guys just pulled together the research that you found, it's not even stuff you've done, just one place, one location, then that, people could use that. That'd be really helpful to them. How can people connect with you? Do they have any questions or just want to follow? Or?
Yeah, for sure. Email is probably the best way for me is, my email is just mheer, Heer at saddleback.com. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. So can I share those?
We'll put them in the show notes. People get a click and follow there. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast, talk about Generation Z. I love what you guys are doing at Saddleback. You're always innovating and tweaking and trying to stay current and maybe even a little bit ahead, which is awesome. It helps the rest of us churches too, learn and maybe implement some of that. So thanks.
For sure. And we're learning a lot from everybody and anybody. So, I mean, we're all in this together. We're all on the same team. So we should be figuring this out together and helping each other win. So
exactly.
We're reaching a generation, not one church youth group, right?
Oh, yeah. It's true. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, Matt.
Hey, thank you so much, Nick.
I think one thing that I was thinking about during that conversation is just how much we could change our approach to ministry with middle school students, with Gen Z in particular. I mean, elementary age, high school, whatever it might be, because things are so different. So I think one of the action steps I thought of coming out of that interview is, what if you sat down with your team, maybe it's other staff, maybe it's volunteers, and brainstormed, how could we teach differently to Gen Z? Whether you're in middle school ministry, high school ministry, maybe elementary, whatever, brainstorm, what could you do differently? Maybe it's just some things you're going to add or tweak or adjust. Maybe it's not a wholesale change, but how could you do that differently? Then I also thought about what he said about telling more stories of students. I thought that's great, and most of us could probably do more of that. So how do we do more of that? Put together a plan to do that. And then the third action step I thought of is just do something on YouTube. I mean, you got to start somewhere. I just listened to the interview on Carrie Newhoff's podcast with Sean Cannell, and he talks all about YouTube, and he's a great follow. If you want to learn more about YouTube, that is something I am not good at all and don't even leverage, quite frankly, for the most part. But I want to. So, and I want to in our church. I want to for like this podcast and Ministry Boost and stuff like that as well. It is very powerful, second biggest search engine. And so do something on YouTube. So those are 3 action steps you could take maybe to make the most of this podcast episode. As usual, you can get the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 149. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we've got those 3 free webinars coming up June 13th, 20th, and 27th. They're all Thursdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can sign up for those at ministryboost.org/webinars. We're going to talk about the 4 disciplines of execution, how to maybe change your staff structure, and then implementing volunteer coaches. 3 helpful topics for sure. And you can sign up for those there. Thanks for listening. Hope this was helpful, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.